The second property of deductive reasoning is the law of syllogism. The law of syllogism is a property that allows you to state a conclusion from two conditional statements when the conclusion of one of the statements is the hypothesis of the other. This one may actually be easier to see if we use the symbols. If P implies Q is true, and Q implies R is true, notice how the conclusion Q in the first conditional is the hypothesis Q in the second conditional. Then P implies R. That is the conclusion that we can make. Let's look at a quick example with this one. We know that if it is July, then you are on summer vacation. Let's also assume that if you are on summer vacation, then you will travel back home is true as well. Notice how you are on summer vacation is the conclusion of the first conditional, and it is the hypothesis of the second conditional. The law of syllogism then allows us to conclude, if it is July, then you will travel back home. Let's try it. What can you conclude from the given information? If a figure is a square, then it is a rectangle. If a figure is a rectangle, then it has four sides. Let's take a look here. In our first statement, our hypothesis says a figure is a square, and our conclusion says the figure is a rectangle. In our second statement, a figure is a rectangle. Notice how the conclusion and the hypothesis are the same thing. And our conclusion of the second one says the figure has four sides. The law of syllogism allows us to connect the hypothesis of the first statement, which says a figure is a square, with the conclusion of the last statement, which says it has four sides. The thing that is important is that the hypothesis of one statement matches the conclusion of the other. If that's the case, the law of syllogism applies, and you can connect the hypothesis of the first statement with the conclusion of the second statement. Let's try another example. If you go to gymnastics, then you are flexible. Notice our hypothesis and conclusion of this statement. The next one says, if you do ballet, then you are flexible. Does the conclusion of one of the conditionals match the hypothesis of the other? It does not, does it? What matches are the conclusion of the first conditional and the conclusion of the second conditional. In this case, the law of syllogism does not apply, so therefore we can draw no conclusions. Once again, it's extremely important that the conclusion of one conditional matches the hypothesis of the other conditional. It's actually possible to use both the law of syllogism and the law of detachment at the same time. Here's an example. What can you conclude from the given information? We have three statements. Two of them are conditionals, and one of them is just a regular sentence. Since we have two conditionals, let's see if the law of syllogism applies. If you live in Accra, then you live in Ghana. And just for reference here, Ghana is a country in Africa. Accra is its capital and largest city, and it sits about halfway along the southern coast there. Accra is indeed in Ghana. This is a true statement. Our second conditional. If you live in Ghana, then you live in Africa. And indeed, Ghana is in Africa. So this is also a true statement. Notice how the conclusion of the first conditional matches the hypothesis of the second conditional. That allows us to link you live in Accra to you live in Africa. Now the law of syllogism allows us to create a new conditional. If you live in Accra, then you live in Africa. Now let's use our new conditional and our final statement and see if we can't use the law of detachment. The hypothesis, you live in Accra, Notice you can be Alyssa, and Alyssa lives in Accra. Our final statement and the hypothesis of our new conditional match precisely. That allows us to say something about Alyssa. Our final conclusion, therefore, is Alyssa, which comes from our conclusion here, lives, and our conclusion says she lives in Africa. We can use the law of syllogism and the law of detachment together in a single problem.